The moment Natalie Bradford held up her wedding ring to the harsh January light streaming through the frosted window, she knew her husband would have understood. Thomas had been dead for 8 months now, taken by a fever that swept through their small ranch outside Columbia, California, in the summer of 1883, and the gold he had once pulled from the earth during better days had long since been spent on medicines that ultimately failed. Now winter gripped the Sierra Nevada foothills with teeth sharper than any wolf, and the woman who had once hosted lavish dinners in Sacramento before following her husband west to seek fortune found herself counting the days until starvation might claim what illness had not. The general store in Columbia smelled of tobacco and leather when she pushed through the door, her thin shawl doing little against the bite of cold that followed her inside. Natalie was 32 years old, though the mirror that morning had shown her a face that could have belonged to someone much older. Grief and hunger had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones, and her dark hair, once her pride, hung limp beneath a bonnet she had mended 3 times already. Mrs. Bradford. Samuel Chen, the store owner, looked up from his ledger with sympathetic eyes. He was one of the few Chinese merchants who had managed to establish a successful business despite the prejudices that ran thick through California's mining towns. "What can I do for you today?" She placed the ring on the counter between them, the small diamond catching light like a frozen tear. "I need supplies, enough to last through February, maybe March. Flour, salt pork, beans, whatever this will cover." Samuel picked up the ring, examined it with the practiced eye of a man who had seen too many desperate transactions. "Mrs. Bradford, this is your wedding ring." "I am aware, Mr. Chen. There must be another way." "Perhaps if you spoke with the church, or maybe some of the other ranchers. I have spoken with them." Her voice remained steady, though her hands trembled where she pressed them against her worn skirt. "The church has already helped me twice. The neighbors have their own families to feed through winter. This is what I have left." Over the next 3 weeks, Natalie Bradford sold everything that held any value. The silver candlesticks that had belonged to her mother went to the banker's wife. Thomas's pocket watch, which had survived the journey from Missouri, found a new owner in the saloon keeper. The china plates, the linens, the carved wooden chairs Thomas had made during their first winter together, all of it passed through her hands and into the possession of others, transformed into sacks of flour and dried beans, and the occasional precious pound of coffee. She sold Thomas's good saddle to the livery owner, his rifle to a prospector heading into the mountains, his books to the schoolteacher who had tears in her eyes as she counted out the coins. The iron stove that had kept their small ranch house warm went to a family just arrived from Ohio. The oil paintings she had brought from her parents' home in Sacramento were purchased by the owner of the Columbia Hotel, who said they would look fine in the dining room. By the first week of February, Natalie Bradford owned almost nothing except the clothes she wore, a thin blanket, and enough food to survive until spring if she was careful. The ranch house echoed with emptiness, bare walls showing rectangles of less faded paint where pictures had hung, naked floors revealing the paths worn by feet that would never walk them again. She had even sold the bed, sleeping now on a pile of hay in the corner, covered by the single blanket she had kept because no one would buy something so threadbare. She was measuring out her breakfast, a careful quarter cup of oats, no more, when she heard the wagon coming up the frozen road. Natalie moved to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched a stranger guide 2 strong horses toward her house. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered beneath a heavy coat, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat the color of tobacco. The man climbed down from the wagon with the easy grace of someone accustomed to long days of physical work. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that curled over his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. When he removed his hat, she saw eyes the color of the summer sky Thomas had loved, blue and clear and direct in their gaze. "Mrs. Bradford." His voice carried easily across the yard, deep and rough like stones rolling in a river. "Name's Fletcher Quinn. Wondering if you might spare a few minutes to talk." Natalie wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped onto the porch, conscious of how she must look gaunt and pale, dressed in a faded calico that had been washed so many times the pattern was nearly gone. "I am Mrs. Bradford." "Are you looking to buy land, Mr. Quinn? Because this ranch is not for sale." "Not here to buy anything, madam. Actually, I am here to return some things." He gestured to the wagon bed, and for the first time Natalie noticed it was loaded with furniture, all of it covered with canvas tarps. "Heard you had some items come up for sale recently. Thought you might want them back." Her heart began to beat faster, a painful hammering against her ribs. "I do not understand." Fletcher Quinn tied off his horses and moved to the back of the wagon, pulling aside one of the tarps. Underneath lay her mother's candlesticks, polished to a silver gleam. "Bought these from Mrs. Hartwell at the bank. Fine pieces. Seem like they should stay in the family that owned them first. Mr. Quinn, I sold those candlesticks because I needed the money to survive. I cannot buy them back." "Not asking you to buy anything, madam." He lifted the candlesticks carefully, as though they were made of something more fragile than silver. "Just asking if you will accept them as a gift. I will not accept charity from a stranger." "Then let me stop being a stranger." He set the candlesticks on the porch rail and met her eyes directly. "I have a ranch about 20 miles north of here, up in the higher country. Been working it alone for 5 years now. Built it up from nothing until I have got 200 head of cattle and some of the best grazing land in Tuolumne County. I am a hard worker, Mrs. Bradford. I do not drink to excess. I do not gamble, and I pay my debts. I came to California from Texas after the war, and I have made something of myself through honest labor. That is all very commendable, Mr. Quinn, but I fail to see. I have been looking for a wife." The words dropped between them like stones into still water. "Not in any hurry, you understand. Wanted to make sure I found the right woman. But winter gets lonely in the high country, and a man starts thinking about what it might be like to have someone to talk to over supper, someone to share the work and the rewards." He paused, studying her face. "Heard about your situation from Samuel Chen at the general store. He is a friend of mine, has been since I first came to Columbia. He mentioned you were a decent woman fallen on hard times, too proud to take help but too stubborn to give up." Natalie felt her cheeks flush hot despite the cold. "Mr. Chen had no right to discuss my private affairs. He did it out of kindness, madam. Same reason I am here." Fletcher gestured to the wagon. "I have been buying up your things as they came available. Got most of the furniture, the household goods, your husband's books and tools. Even tracked down his pocket watch, though that took some doing since the saloon keeper had already sold it to a gambler passing through. Caught up with him in Sonora and convinced him to part with it for a fair price." She stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Why would you do such a thing?" "Because I need a wife and you need help, and it seemed to me we might strike a deal that would benefit us both." He said it simply, as though he were discussing the price of cattle or the quality of hay. "I am proposing marriage, Mrs. Bradford. A practical arrangement between two people who could help each other. You would have a home, food, security. I would have a partner, someone to help run the ranch and make a life with. In time, if we suit each other well enough, maybe it could become something more than just practical." Natalie's hands gripped the porch rail so hard her knuckles went white. "You are insane. You do not know me. I do not know you. People do not simply propose marriage to strangers. Happens all the time out here, madam. Half the married couples in California met through arrangements just like this. Mail-order brides, matchmakers, practical agreements between people who needed partners. Some of them have grown into real love matches. Others have stayed friendly partnerships. Either way, both parties end up better than they were alone. I was married to a man I loved." Her voice broke on the words. "Thomas and I chose each other freely. We courted for a year before we wed. I cannot simply replace him with a stranger because it is convenient." Fletcher's expression softened. "Not asking you to replace him, madam. Your husband is gone, and I am sorry for your loss. But he is gone, and you are still here, and you deserve to keep living. I am offering you a chance to do that with dignity instead of starving alone in an empty house." The tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down her cheeks despite her efforts to hold them back. She turned away from him, ashamed of her weakness, but he made no move to leave. She could hear him moving around the wagon, the soft sounds of canvas being rearranged, the creak of wood and leather. "I will leave these things on your porch," he said finally. "You can decide what you want to do with them. If you want to sell them again, that is your right. If you want to keep them, they are yours. And if you want to think about my proposal, I will be staying at the Columbia Hotel for the next week. Room 12. You can send word there if you have an answer for me. Mr. Quinn." She forced herself to turn back, to face him despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "Why me? If you truly want a wife, there must be a dozen women in Columbia alone who would accept your offer. Why seek out a widow you have never even met?" He considered the question, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "Samuel told me about you, said you were educated, well-spoken. Said you had worked alongside your husband on the ranch even when you were not accustomed to hard labor. Said you never complained when fortune turned against you, just kept fighting to survive with whatever you had left." He met her eyes again. "That is the kind of woman I want beside me, Mrs. Bradford. Someone with spine, someone who knows how to endure." He loaded the last of the items onto her porch, the candlesticks, a box of books, 2 of the carved chairs, and Thomas's pocket watch wrapped carefully in cloth. Then he climbed back onto his wagon, tipped his hat to her, and drove away down the frozen road without looking back. Natalie stood on the porch long after he had disappeared, her mind reeling. The sensible part of her knew she should be offended, insulted that a stranger thought he could buy her affections by purchasing her possessions. But another part, the part that had been quietly starving in an empty house while winter pressed down like a suffocating hand, whispered that Fletcher Quinn had offered her something precious, a future. That night she sat in one of the returned chairs, wrapped in her thin blanket, and tried to imagine what life might be like on a ranch in the high country with a man she did not know. Would he be kind? Would he expect more from her than she was willing to give? Could she truly stand before a preacher and promise to honor a stranger, less than a year after burying the man she had loved? But then she thought about spring, about the food running out, about the bank eventually foreclosing on the ranch because she could not pay the taxes. She thought about becoming one of those desperate women who haunted the mining camps, doing whatever work they could find to survive. She thought about dying alone in this empty house, her body not found until the thaw. When morning came, Natalie Bradford washed her face in icy water, put on her least faded dress, and walked the 3 miles into Columbia. The hotel clerk directed her to room 12, and she stood outside the door for a full minute before gathering the courage to knock. Fletcher Quinn answered in his shirt sleeves, his hair still damp from washing. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, but he stepped back immediately, holding the door open. "Mrs. Bradford, please come in." "That would not be proper, Mr. Quinn. I am a widow, not a shameless woman." "Of course. My apologies." He grabbed his coat from a peg and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "Would you walk with me? There is a cafe down the street that serves decent coffee." They sat across from each other in a corner of the small restaurant, steam rising from their cups. Natalie had forgotten what real coffee tasted like, strong and bitter and gloriously hot. She wrapped her hands around the cup and met Fletcher's patient gaze. "I need to know some things before I can give you an answer," she said. "Ask me anything you want, madam. Do you drink?" "I will take a whiskey now and then, but I have never been drunk in my life. Saw what it did to my father, and I swore I would not follow that path." "Do you have a temper?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I get angry sometimes, same as any man, but I have never raised my hand to a woman or child, and I never will. That is a promise I will make before God if needed. What would you expect from me as a wife?" "Someone to help run the household, cook meals, tend the garden come spring. Someone to talk to over supper and wake up beside in the morning. Someone who would be willing to work alongside me to build something lasting." He met her eyes steadily. "And yes, eventually, I would hope for intimacy and maybe children. But I would not expect that right away, Mrs. Bradford. I understand you are still in mourning. We could take time to get to know each other first." Natalie felt her cheeks heat but forced herself to continue. "I am 32 years old, Mr. Quinn. I have been married before, but Thomas and I never had children. It is possible I am barren." "Then we will not have children. I want a partner, madam, not a brood mare." His voice was firm, almost angry. "Any man who would put you aside for that reason is not worth your time." She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup, this tall stranger with calloused hands and clear blue eyes. "You said you came from Texas. Did you fight in the war?" "I did. For the Confederacy, since I was in Texas when it started. But I will tell you plain, Mrs. Bradford, I never owned slaves and my family never did either. We were poor farmers, and when the war ended I went west because I had nothing to go back to. I am not proud of everything I did during those years, but I was young and I did what I thought was right at the time." He paused. "If that is a problem for you, I will understand." Natalie considered this. Her own family had been Union sympathizers, though they had been far from the fighting in California. Thomas had been too old to serve, which had been a relief to them both. "The war has been over for 18 years, Mr. Quinn. I judge men by who they are now, not who they were when they were boys." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Thank you for that." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe washing over them, the clink of dishes, the murmur of conversation, the hiss of bacon on a griddle. Finally, Natalie set down her cup and folded her hands in her lap. "If I agreed to this arrangement, what would the terms be exactly?" Fletcher leaned forward, his expression serious. "We would marry as soon as possible, proper church wedding with witnesses. I would move all your belongings to my ranch, the things I have already bought back, plus anything else you want to bring. The ranch would be ours together, both our names on the deed. You would have your own money, separate from mine, for your personal needs. And if you ever wanted to leave for any reason, you would be free to go with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. You would put those terms in writing." "I already have." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Had a lawyer in Sonora draw it up. You can read it over, have your own lawyer look at it if you want. I mean to do this right, Mrs. Bradford." She took the document with shaking hands and read through it carefully. Everything he had promised was there, laid out in clear legal language. The generosity of the terms took her breath away. This was not a man seeking to trap a desperate woman, but someone genuinely trying to create a fair partnership. "Why are you being so generous?" she asked quietly. "Because I want a real marriage eventually, not just a piece of paper and a woman who feels trapped." He reached across the table but stopped short of touching her hand. "I have been alone for a long time, Mrs. Bradford. I know what loneliness feels like. I would not wish to inflict that feeling on anyone else, especially not someone I hope to build a life with." Natalie looked down at the document, then at the man across from her, then at her own hands, thin and work-worn, the finger where her wedding ring had been still showing a pale indent. She thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared, and wondered what he would tell her to do. But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, and Fletcher Quinn was offering her a chance to keep living. "I will marry you," she said. They were wed 3 days later in the small church at the edge of Columbia, with Samuel Chen and his wife as witnesses. Natalie wore her best dress, carefully mended and pressed, and Fletcher had bought her a bouquet of winter roses that must have cost a small fortune. The preacher kept the ceremony brief, sensing perhaps that this was not a love match but something more practical, and when Fletcher kissed her at the end it was chaste and quick, his lips barely brushing hers. The trip to his ranch took most of the day, the wagon loaded with everything that remained of her old life. They traveled north into higher country, the road climbing steadily as they left Columbia behind. Fletcher drove with easy competence, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the land they were passing through. "That is where the Miwok used to have a summer camp," he said, indicating a flat meadow beside a frozen creek. "They do not come here much anymore, but sometimes you will see them passing through to the higher elevations. Good people, mostly. They taught me a lot about surviving in these mountains when I first came here. You trade with them. When they come through, yes. They bring baskets and herbs and I give them beef or supplies. Seems like a fair exchange." He glanced at her. "Some folks in town do not approve of me being friendly with Indians. If that bothers you." "It does not bother me, Mr. Quinn. I believe we should treat all people with decency." "Fletcher," he said. "You can call me Fletcher. We are married now." "Then you should call me Natalie." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "Natalie, that is a pretty name." The ranch appeared as the sun was beginning to set. A sturdy house built of logs and stone nestled in a valley between 2 pine-covered ridges. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see a barn, a corral with several horses, and fenced pastures stretching up the hillsides. It was isolated but beautiful, the kind of place that made you understand why people endured hardship to live in wild country. "I have a hired man named Jack Turner who looks after things when I am gone," Fletcher explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "He is staying in the barn loft tonight to give us privacy. Good fellow, been with me for 2 years. You will meet him tomorrow." The inside of the house was sparse but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a separate bedroom, and a loft overhead for storage. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and there was a pot of stew warming on the stove. Jack's work, she assumed. The walls were bare logs chinked with mud, and the furniture was simple but well made. It was the home of a bachelor, practical and unadorned, but there was something solid about it that she found comforting. "I know it is not much compared to what you are used to," Fletcher said, watching her face anxiously. "But it is sturdy, and it stays warm even in the worst weather. Come spring, we could fix it up however you like, paint, curtains, whatever you want." "It is fine," Natalie said honestly. "It is more than I expected." They ate the stew in awkward silence, sitting at the rough-hewn table while the fire crackled. Natalie found herself sneaking glances at her new husband. trying to reconcile the reality of this stranger with the fact that she was now legally bound to him. He ate neatly, his manners better than she had expected from a man who lived alone in the mountains, and he made sure to serve her first and give her the larger portion. After supper, he showed her where everything was kept: the pantry well stocked with supplies, the root cellar full of preserved vegetables, the bedroom with its large bed covered in quilts. He pointed to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "That is empty. You can use it for your things. And the pegs on the wall there are for your dresses." He stood in the doorway, not entering the room. "I will sleep in the loft tonight, give you some privacy to settle in." Natalie turned to him in surprise. "Fletcher, we are married. You do not need to sleep in the loft." "I know we are married." His voice was gentle but firm. "But you buried your husband only 8 months ago, and you married me out of necessity, not love. I meant what I said about taking time to get to know each other. We can share a bed when you are ready, not before." Something in her chest, a hard knot she had not known was there, loosened slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and turned away, then paused. "Natalie, I am glad you are here. I know this is strange for both of us, but I think we made the right choice. I truly do." That night, Natalie lay alone in the large bed, wrapped in soft quilts that smelled of cedar and wood smoke. Above her, she could hear the quiet sounds of Fletcher settling into the loft. She thought about Thomas, about their wedding night so many years ago, about all the nights they had shared since. She had never imagined lying in a strange bed, married to a man she barely knew, her old life packed into a single trunk. But as she drifted toward sleep, she realized that for the first time in months she was not afraid. She was warm and fed and safe, and the man sleeping in the loft had shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. It was not love, not yet, but it was something. It was a beginning. The next morning, Natalie woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly in the cold room and emerged to find Fletcher at the stove, working with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to cooking for himself. He glanced up when she entered and smiled. "Morning. Coffee is ready, and breakfast will be done in a minute. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months, honestly." She poured herself coffee and sat at the table, watching him work. In the morning light streaming through the window, she could see details she had missed the night before: the strength in his shoulders, the way his hands moved with confidence and precision, the small scar on his jaw that might have come from a knife or a fall. "Good. I am glad." He slid eggs and bacon onto 2 plates and joined her at the table. "Thought I would give you a tour of the place after breakfast, introduce you to Jack, show you where everything is. Then you can decide how you want to spend your day. No expectations, Natalie. You are not a servant here. We will figure out how to divide the work as we go." Jack Turner turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s with a limp he had earned breaking horses, and a dry sense of humor that made Natalie laugh despite her nervousness. He treated Fletcher with obvious respect and greeted Natalie with a formal courtesy that put her at ease. "About time the boss got himself a wife," Jack said, his eyes twinkling. "Maybe now he will stop trying to cook. Man can do a lot of things well, but making biscuits is not one of them." "My biscuits are not that bad," Fletcher protested. "They are like eating rocks, boss. No offense intended." Natalie found herself smiling. "I can make biscuits. My mother taught me when I was young." "Then you are already worth your weight in gold, madam." Jack tipped his hat to her. "Welcome to the ranch." The days began to fall into a rhythm. Natalie took over the cooking and the indoor work, finding satisfaction in transforming the bachelor house into a real home. She baked bread that filled the rooms with warmth and scent, cooked meals that made both men groan with pleasure, washed and mended clothes that had gone too long without proper care. Fletcher brought her things she had not asked for: cloth for curtains, seeds for a spring garden, a new dress from the general store that actually fit properly. He also brought back the rest of her possessions, making trips to Columbia over the next few weeks to collect everything he had purchased. The books went on shelves he built specially for them. The candlesticks found a place of honor on the mantel. Thomas's pocket watch he kept in her trunk, too precious to display but too meaningful to sell. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Fletcher told her about his childhood in Texas, about growing up poor but loved, about losing his parents to cholera and coming west with nothing but a horse and determination. She told him about Sacramento, about her privileged upbringing and her choice to marry Thomas Bradford, despite her parents' reservations about him being a minor. "They thought I was throwing my life away," she said one night, staring into the flames. "Trading society for a rough mining camp, elegance for hard work. But I loved him and I never regretted my choice, not even when things got difficult. You must miss him terribly." "I do." She glanced at Fletcher, afraid of hurting him with her honesty. "I always will, I think. But I am beginning to understand that missing someone does not mean I have to stop living. Thomas would not have wanted me to starve out of loyalty to his memory." Fletcher reached over and took her hand, the first time he had initiated such contact. His palm was rough with calluses but warm, solid, real. "I am not trying to replace him, Natalie. I could not even if I wanted to. But I would like to think that maybe, in time, you could find some happiness here with me. Not the same as what you had before, but something good in its own right." She looked down at their joined hands and felt something flutter in her chest, tentative as a bird testing new wings. "I think that might be possible, Fletcher." Winter began to loosen its grip as February turned to March. The snow retreated from the lower elevations, and the first green shoots appeared in the meadows. Natalie planted her garden, working the soil with her hands while Fletcher repaired fences and prepared for the spring cattle drive. They worked side by side more often now, falling into an easy partnership that felt natural despite its strange beginning. One afternoon, they were fixing a section of fence together when Fletcher suddenly stopped working and looked at her. "You have dirt on your face," he said, smiling. "I imagine I have dirt everywhere." She tried to wipe her cheek with her sleeve and only made it worse. "Here, let me." He stepped closer and gently brushed the dirt away with his thumb, his touch feather light against her skin. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes, not just blue but flecked with gray, like a summer sky threatening rain. "Thank you," she said quietly, but she did not step back. "Natalie." His voice was rough, uncertain. "Can I kiss you?" "Really kiss you, I mean. Not like at the wedding." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. She had not been kissed since Thomas had not wanted to be, but now she found herself nodding, swaying slightly toward him. Fletcher cupped her face in both hands, his calluses catching slightly on her skin, and kissed her with a gentleness that made her chest ache. It was not like kissing Thomas had been familiar, comfortable, the intimacy of years. This was new and strange and a little frightening, but it was also sweet, tender, full of promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," Fletcher admitted. "I have been thinking about it too," Natalie confessed. "I felt guilty, like I was betraying Thomas, but I am beginning to understand that having feelings for you does not mean I loved him any less. You can love him and still have room in your heart for something new. The heart is not like a house, Natalie. It does not run out of rooms." That night when they prepared for bed, Natalie stopped Fletcher as he gathered his blankets to take to the loft. "You could stay," she said. "If you want to, I think I am ready. Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured. I am sure." She met his eyes steadily. We are husband and wife, Fletcher, and I would like to truly be your wife, if you will have me." What happened between them that night was tender and careful, Fletcher taking his time to learn her body, asking permission with every touch, making sure she felt safe and cherished. It was different from the passion she had known with Thomas, less familiar, but no less meaningful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the warm bed, and Natalie rested her head on Fletcher's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I think I could fall in love with you," she whispered into the darkness. "I think maybe I already am." She felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "I have been falling for you since the first time I saw you standing on that porch, looking like you would fight the whole world before you would give up. You are the strongest woman I have ever met, Natalie Quinn." "Natalie Quinn," she repeated, tasting the name. "I like how that sounds." Spring arrived in full force, transforming the mountains into a paradise of wildflowers and new grass. The cattle grew fat on the fresh grazing, and Fletcher hired 2 additional men to help with the work. Natalie's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables to supplement their diet of beef and beans. She made friends with the wife of a neighboring rancher, a woman named Sarah who lived 10 miles east and was grateful for female company in the isolated high country. In May, Fletcher took her to Columbia for supplies, and they walked down the main street hand in hand, greeting the townsfolk as a proper married couple. Samuel Chen grinned when he saw them and pulled Fletcher aside. "I knew you two would be good for each other," he said. "She looks happy." "Really happy?" "I am doing my best to keep her that way," Fletcher replied. They ate lunch at the cafe where Fletcher had proposed, sitting at the same corner table. Natalie found herself thinking about that day, about how terrified and desperate she had been, about how impossible the idea of marrying a stranger had seemed. Now that stranger was her husband in every sense, and she could not imagine her life without him. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, noticing her faraway expression. "I am thinking about how strange life is. 8 months ago, I was alone and starving, selling everything I owned just to survive. Now I am sitting here with you, planning a future I never expected to have. If someone had told me last winter that I would be happy again, I would not have believed them." Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand. "I am glad you gave me a chance, glad you were brave enough to take a risk on a stranger. You are not a stranger anymore, Fletcher. You are my husband, my partner, my friend." She paused, then added softly, "My love." His eyes lit up. "You have never said that before." "I know, I wanted to be sure I meant it." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Fletcher Quinn, not the same way I loved Thomas, but just as deeply, just as truly." "I love you too, Natalie. Have since the moment you opened that door looking like you would bite my head off if I pitied you." He laughed. "Though maybe I should not admit that I fell in love before you did. You can admit anything you want. We have no secrets between us." That summer was the happiest Natalie could remember. She and Fletcher worked the ranch together, falling into perfect synchronization. She learned to ride properly, something Thomas had never taught her, and Fletcher taught her with patience and humor, catching her when she fell and celebrating when she finally mastered the difficult art of roping. They swam in the creek on hot afternoons, cooked meals together over the open fire during roundup, and slept under the stars when the work kept them far from the house. In August, Natalie realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed, but when September came and went with no sign of bleeding, she allowed herself to believe. She was carrying Fletcher's child. She told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He was whittling a new handle for a broken tool, and she was mending a shirt, their hands busy while their minds drifted peacefully. "Fletcher, I need to tell you something." What is it? He looked up from his work, his face open and curious. I am with child. Almost 3 months along, I think. The knife clattered to the porch floor as he stood so fast his chair tipped over. You are certain as I can be without a doctor. She smiled at his shocked expression. Are you happy? Happy. He pulled her up into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. Natalie, I am beyond happy. I am the luckiest man in California, maybe in the whole country. He set her down gently, suddenly worried, but I should not be throwing you around. Is the baby all right? Are you all right? We are both fine. I am healthy and strong, Fletcher. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But you are not just any woman. You are my woman, my wife. He placed his hand carefully on her belly, which had not yet begun to show. My God, there is a baby in there. Our baby. They rode to Columbia the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Natalie already knew. The baby was due in early spring, probably March or April. Dr. Harrison, who had been practicing medicine in Columbia for 20 years, pronounced her fit and healthy, and gave them a list of instructions to follow as the pregnancy progressed. As winter approached again, Fletcher became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, worried constantly about her falling, and made sure she ate the best portions of every meal. Jack Turner thought it was hilarious and teased him mercilessly. The boss has gone soft, Jack announced one morning when Fletcher refused to let Natalie carry a basket of laundry. Next thing you know, he will be knitting baby clothes. I do not know how to knit, Fletcher protested. Then you had better learn, because that baby is going to need something to wear. In fact, it was Fletcher who learned to knit, sitting by the fire in the evenings with Natalie patiently teaching him the basic stitches. His first attempts were disasters, lumpy, misshapen things that made them both laugh. But he persevered with the same determination he brought to every challenge, and by December, he had actually produced a passable baby blanket. It is not pretty, but it is warm, he said, presenting it to her with shy pride. Natalie held the blanket to her chest, tears streaming down her face. It is perfect, absolutely perfect. This winter was nothing like the last. The house was warm and full of laughter, the pantry overflowing with supplies, and every night she fell asleep in her husband's arms, safe and loved and content. Her belly swelled with the growing child, and sometimes in the quiet moments she would feel it move inside her, a flutter like butterfly wings, and she would place Fletcher's hand there so he could feel it too. That is our son or daughter, he would say, wonder in his voice. Actually growing inside you. It is a miracle, Natalie. An absolute miracle. Christmas came, and they decorated the house with pine boughs and the red berries from the hillside. Fletcher carved a wooden horse for the baby, working on it in secret and surprising her on Christmas morning. She gave him a new coat she had sewn herself, lined with fur she had traded for with the Miwok people who had come through in the fall. I have something else for you, Fletcher said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a gold wedding band set with small sapphires. I know you lost your wedding ring from your first marriage. I am not trying to replace it, but I wanted you to have a ring that represents us, our life together. Natalie slipped the ring on her finger, watching it catch the firelight. It is beautiful. I will treasure it always. Not as much as I treasure you. The winter passed slowly but peacefully. Natalie grew large with the baby, her movements becoming more awkward as spring approached. Fletcher hovered constantly, ready to catch her if she stumbled, insisting she rest even when she felt perfectly capable of working. In late March, on a warm afternoon when the first flowers were pushing through the melting snow, Natalie felt the first contraction. She and Fletcher had already made arrangements with Sarah, the neighbor woman, who came to help with the birth. Dr. Harrison arrived the next morning, just as the labor was reaching its peak. The birth was hard and long, lasting through the night and into the next day. Fletcher stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, whispering encouragement even when she screamed curses at him through the pain. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son came into the world with a furious cry. "You have a boy, Doctor," Harrison announced, placing the squalling infant on Natalie's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Natalie looked down at her son, red-faced and angry, his tiny fists waving in outrage at being forced from his warm home. He had dark hair like Fletcher and eyes that might turn blue or might stay gray. "He was perfect. What should we name him?" Fletcher asked, his voice choked with emotion. "I was thinking Thomas Fletcher Quinn," Natalie said quietly, "after the two most important men in my life." Fletcher's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I do not want you to feel like you have to, I am sure. Thomas was part of my life, and that is not something to hide or forget. Our son can carry his name with pride." She looked up at her husband. "But he will know you as his father. You are the man who will raise him, teach him, love him. That is what matters." They named him Thomas Fletcher Quinn, though they called him Tommy from the start to distinguish him from his namesake. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. Fletcher was completely besotted, spending hours just watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. "I cannot believe we made this," he said one night, holding his sleeping son against his chest. "That something this perfect came from us. We did well, did we not?" Natalie leaned against his shoulder, watching their child sleep. "I never thought I would have this, Fletcher. A family, a home, real happiness. I thought that part of my life was over when Thomas died. I am glad you were wrong." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I am glad we found each other, even if it took desperation and a meddling storekeeper to bring us together." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Natalie cared for Tommy during the day while Fletcher worked the ranch, and in the evenings they passed him back and forth, both unwilling to miss a moment of his growing and changing. He smiled for the first time in June, laughed in July, and by August was trying to crawl, his determination to explore the world already evident. That fall, Fletcher hired another hand so he could spend more time helping with Tommy. They took him everywhere: on the porch to watch the sunset, down to the creek to splash in the water, out to the pastures to see the cattle. He was endlessly curious, reaching for everything, trying to put the whole world in his mouth. "He is going to be trouble," Jack predicted, watching Tommy attempt to eat a grasshopper. "Mark my words, that boy will keep you both running." "I hope so," Natalie said, laughing as she rescued the grasshopper. "I hope he fills this house with noise and chaos for years to come." As Tommy's first birthday approached, Natalie realized she was pregnant again. This time she was certain almost immediately, recognizing the signs from before. Fletcher was overjoyed, though he worried about her having two babies so close together. "Women do it all the time," she assured him. "And I have you to help me. I am not facing this alone." Their second child, a daughter they named Clara Rose Quinn, arrived the following spring with much less drama than her brother had. She was small and delicate where Tommy had been big and sturdy, with Fletcher's blue eyes and Natalie's dark hair. Tommy, newly 2 years old, was fascinated by his sister, constantly wanting to touch her and help care for her. The ranch prospered as the children grew. Fletcher expanded the herd and built a new barn, hired more hands to help with the work, and became known throughout Tuolumne County as a fair employer and an honest businessman. Natalie tended her ever-growing garden, sold preserves and baked goods to the hotel in Colombia, and saved every penny for the children's future. They added rooms to the house as the family grew a proper nursery for the children, a separate office where Fletcher could keep his accounts, a larger kitchen with a new stove that Natalie had coveted for years. The walls that had once been bare logs were now covered with wallpaper she had chosen from a catalog, and curtains she had sewn herself hung at every window. One evening, when Tommy was 5 and Clara was 3, the family sat together on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dark. Tommy was teaching Clara the names of the stars, pointing up at the sky with the confident authority of an older brother. Fletcher had his arm around Natalie, and she leaned into his warmth, content in the way that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. "Do you ever think about that first winter?" Fletcher asked quietly. "When you were alone and I showed up with a wagon full of your furniture." "I think about it sometimes," Natalie admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else. You never regretted it." Marrying a stranger. She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life and then given her so much more than mere survival. His face was more lined now, weathered by sun and wind and the passage of time, but his eyes were the same clear blue, full of love and steadiness. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me everything, Fletcher. A home, a family, a future I never could have imagined. You gave me back my life." "You gave me a life worth living," he countered. "Before you, I had a ranch and some cattle and a whole lot of empty rooms. Now I have everything that matters. You, the children, a real family. I am the one who got the better end of that bargain, Natalie." She laughed and kissed him, quick and easy, the kiss of long familiarity. "Then I suppose we are both lucky." Tommy came running over, Clara toddling behind him. "Papa, Mama, look!" Clara caught a firefly. They bent over Clara's cupped hands, peering at the insect glowing softly in the cave of her palms. "You have to let it go, sweetheart," Natalie said gently. "It needs to be free to fly." Clara opened her hands and the firefly drifted upward, joining its fellows in their eternal dance. She laughed with delight, clapping her hands, and Tommy cheered as though she had accomplished something magnificent. "She is just like you," Fletcher said to Natalie. "Beautiful and strong and absolutely fearless. And Tommy is just like you, determined and kind and absolutely stubborn." They watched their children play in the fading light, their laughter rising like music into the spring evening. Tomorrow there would be work to do, fences to mend, cattle to tend, children to raise. There would be challenges and struggles, because life was never easy even when it was good. But they would face it all together, as partners, as lovers, as family. Natalie thought back to that desperate winter woman who had sold her wedding ring just to buy another week of life. If she could speak to that woman now, she would tell her that sometimes the darkest moments precede the greatest blessings. That sometimes the strangers who walk into your life become the people you cannot imagine living without. That love is not a limited resource to be carefully hoarded, but an infinite well that deepens with every person who drinks from it. Fletcher Quinn had bought back her possessions, but what he had really given her was far more valuable. He had given her hope when she had none left. He had given her partnership when she expected only loneliness. He had given her love when she thought her heart was too broken to hold it. And in return, she had given him everything she had: her trust, her body, her heart, her life. It was a fair trade, she thought, more than fair. It was perfect. As the stars came out one by one, and the children finally grew tired enough to be carried to bed, Fletcher and Natalie sat together in the gathering darkness, their hands entwined, their hearts at peace. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of summer, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled at the rising moon. "I love you," Natalie said simply. "I love you too," Fletcher replied. "Always have, always will." It was enough. It was everything. It was the happy ending neither of them had dared to hope for. One through courage and kindness, and the simple choice to take a chance on love when it appeared in the most unlikely form. Years later, when their children were grown and they had grandchildren running through the ranch that had become a true legacy, Fletcher and Natalie would sit on that same porch and remember the winter that had changed everything. They would remember the desperation and the hope, the fear and the faith, the strangeness and the sweetness of their beginning. And they would hold hands the way they always had, grateful for every day they had been given together, knowing that the best decision either of them had ever made was the day they chose each other, chose love, chose life over mere survival. Tommy grew into a tall young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Fletcher aged, eventually becoming a full partner in running the operation. At 22, he married a schoolteacher from Sonora named Elizabeth, and they gave Natalie and Fletcher their first grandchildren, twin boys who were just as rambunctious as Tommy had been. Clara became a skilled horsewoman, racing across the mountain meadows with fearless abandon. She had her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her nearly unstoppable when she set her mind to something. At 19, she shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to study medicine, becoming one of the first women doctors in California. Fletcher sold 20 head of cattle to pay for her education, and Natalie sewed her enough proper dresses to see her through 3 years at medical school in San Francisco. In 1895, when Fletcher was 57 and Natalie was 54, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together friends and family from across the county. The ranch house overflowed with people, food covering every surface, children running wild through the rooms that had once echoed with emptiness. Samuel Chen came from Colombia, older now but still sharp-eyed and smiling. He pulled Fletcher aside during the party and clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, my friend. You both did good. It all started with you, Samuel. You told me about her. If not for that, you would have found someone else and she would have found another way. But I am glad it worked out the way it did. You two were meant for each other." Anyone can see that. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home and the children were finally asleep, Fletcher and Natalie slipped outside to the porch. The night was warm and clear, the sky blazing with stars, the air sweet with the scent of pine and wildflowers. 12 years, Natalie said, leaning against the porch rail. It does not seem possible that much time has passed. Best 12 years of my life, Fletcher said, coming to stand beside her. Though I hope we have many more ahead of us. We will, I can feel it. She looked up at the stars, remembering another night when she had looked at those same stars and seen only darkness and despair. "Do you know what I was thinking the night before you came to my ranch with that wagon? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about giving up. About just lying down and letting winter take me. I was so tired, Fletcher, so tired of fighting and losing and being alone." She felt his arm go around her shoulders and leaned into his strength. "And then you appeared like something out of a story, this stranger who wanted to help me for no reason except that I needed help. You saved my life that day." "We saved each other," Fletcher corrected. "I was just as lonely as you were, Natalie, just as tired of being alone. You gave my life meaning. You gave me a reason to build something lasting instead of just existing from day to day." She turned in his arms to face him, this man who had become her whole world. His hair was more gray than dark now, his face deeply lined by years of wind and sun and laughter. but his eyes were still the same clear blue, still full of love when he looked at her. "We did well, did we not?" she said. "With our life together, we did better than well. We built something beautiful." He gestured to the house behind them, full of sleeping grandchildren and the echoes of a dozen years of love and laughter. All of this, the children, the grandchildren, the ranch, the life we have made, it all started because I was brave enough to propose to a stranger and you were brave enough to say yes. "Best decision I ever made," Natalie said. "Second best," Fletcher corrected with a smile. "The best decision you made was not giving up that winter. Everything else followed from that." They stood together on the porch as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other at the edge of despair and built a life beyond anything either had dared to imagine. Behind them, their house stood solid and warm, full of family, full of love, full of the life they had created together through courage and faith, and the simple choice to help each other survive. The wind whispered through the pines the way it always had, carrying with it the songs of the wilderness. Somewhere in the mountains, a wolf howled. In the barn, the horses stirred and settled. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, witnesses to all the small human dramas played out beneath their distant light. And on the porch of a ranch house in the high country of California, a cowboy and a widow who had become so much more than those simple titles held each other close and gave thanks for the chances they had taken, the risks that had paid off, the love that had transformed them both. "Come to bed, husband," Natalie said finally, taking Fletcher's hand. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Tomorrow is always a long day," Fletcher agreed, but he smiled as he said it. "But that is all right. I have got you beside me, and that makes every day worth living." They went inside together, closing the door on the night, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, as partners, as lovers, as the family they had built from nothing but determination and hope and love. The house settled into quiet as they prepared for bed, the familiar routine of 12 years of marriage. Fletcher banked the fire while Natalie checked on the sleeping grandchildren one last time. They undressed in comfortable silence, slipped beneath quilts that Natalie had sewn and Fletcher had helped choose, and came together in the warm darkness as naturally as breathing. "Thank you," Natalie whispered into the darkness, "for everything, for choosing me, for saving me, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Fletcher replied, "for trusting me, for building this life with me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed possible." They fell asleep as they had every night for 12 years, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the warmth and the love and the simple blessing of not being alone. Outside, the wind continued its eternal song. The stars burned cold and bright in the vast darkness. The world turned, indifferent to the small joys and sorrows of those who walked its surface. But in that house in the high country, two people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully, their hearts full, their lives complete, their love as steady and enduring as the mountains that surrounded them. And if happiness could be measured in such moments, in the quiet breathing of sleeping children, in the warmth of a beloved body close in the darkness, in the deep peace of knowing you are exactly where you belong with exactly who you were meant to be with, then Fletcher and Natalie Quinn were among the richest people in the world. The years continued to unfold, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that come with a life fully lived. There were more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. There were hard winters and prosperous summers. There were losses that made them weep and triumphs that made them dance with joy. Through it all, Fletcher and Natalie remained constants in each other's lives, their love deepening with every shared sunrise, every crisis weathered together, every moment of ordinary happiness. When they were in their 70s, too old now for the hard work of ranching but still vital and engaged with life, they would sit on that same porch and tell their grandchildren the story of how they met. The children would listen with wide eyes, finding it hard to believe that their grandma Natalie had once been so desperate she sold her wedding ring for food, or that their grandpa Fletcher had been bold enough to propose marriage to a complete stranger. But were you not scared? One granddaughter asked Natalie once. Terrified, Natalie admitted. But sometimes being scared is not a reason to say no. Sometimes the things that scare us most are exactly what we need. Was it love at first sight? Another grandchild wanted to know. Fletcher and Natalie looked at each other and smiled, a lifetime of shared understanding passing between them in that glance. No, Fletcher said honestly. It was not love at first sight. It was something better than that. It was trust at first sight, respect at first sight, hope at first sight. And from those things, love grew naturally, the way a tree grows from a seed planted in good soil. Love at first sight is just a story, Natalie added. Real love is built day by day, choice by choice, through all the small moments and large crises that make up a life. Your grandfather and I fell in love slowly, over months and years, as we learned who each other really was. That kind of love lasts because it is built on something solid. The grandchildren would nod as though they understood, though most were too young to truly grasp the wisdom being offered. But the words would stay with them, and years later, when they faced their own decisions about love and marriage and life, they would remember their grandparents on that porch, still holding hands after 50 years together, still clearly and obviously in love. Fletcher Quinn lived to the remarkable age of 83, remaining active and engaged almost until the very end. He died peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night in 1911, with Natalie beside him in the bed they had shared for more than 28 years. His last words to her were the same ones he had spoken countless times before. I love you, always have, always will. Natalie grieved as anyone would grieve the loss of a beloved partner, but she did not break. She had been broken once before, long ago, and Fletcher had helped her heal. Now she drew on that old strength, that stubborn refusal to give up that had kept her alive through a desperate winter so many years before. She lived for another 5 years after Fletcher's death, cared for by her children, and surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about her life, about the 2 men she had loved, about the Wild West that was rapidly disappearing into memory and legend. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, her mind clear even when her body began to fail. On a cool spring morning in 1916, Natalie Bradford Quinn died peacefully at the age of 85, holding the hands of her children as she slipped away. Her last words were about Fletcher, something about seeing him waiting for her, and the smile on her face as she died was one of pure joy. They buried her beside Fletcher on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, beneath the pines they had both loved. The headstones were simple. Fletcher Quinn, 1828-1911, beloved husband and father. Natalie Quinn, 1831-1916, beloved wife and mother. But beneath those formal words, Tommy and Clara had added one more line to each stone under Fletcher's name. He gave her back her life under Natalie's name. She gave him a reason to live it. The ranch continued for several more generations, eventually becoming one of the most successful cattle operations in Tuolumne County. But those who lived there and worked the land always remembered the story of how it began with a desperate widow and a lonely cowboy who took a chance on each other and built something lasting from the ashes of loss and loneliness. And if you visit that hillside cemetery today, You can still see those two headstones side by side, weathered by more than a century of wind and rain and snow, but still standing strong, just like the love they commemorate. Still together, even in death, just as they had been in life. It was a good story, the kind that reminds us that love can come from the most unexpected places, that courage is sometimes just another word for desperation, and that the choices we make in our darkest moments can lead to blessings we never could have imagined. Fletcher Quinn bought back Natalie Bradford's possessions, but what he really gave her was far more valuable. He gave her tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. And in return, she gave him the same gift along with her trust, her partnership, and eventually, her heart. It was, by any measure, a fair trade, more than fair. It was perfect.